Good morning to all. Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
A pleasure to be here today. This morning to open the Bible with you, and we can provide a study on the book of Romans, chapter 14. In the book of Romans, chapter 14, I aim to study with you regarding cultural differences and how this impacts the church. And not only in today's church, but also in the early days of the church. And we can ask ourselves, why is it that two people hardly will agree with each other on everything all the time? The truth is that the most basic observations of life and about human nature is that we are different, very different. This is so essential to human nature that it's almost impossible to conceive of a world in which all people are the same, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. A world like that would not even be interesting. We are different from the very moment that we were born, of our conception, our values, our interpretations, our temperaments, the environment in which we grow up. Everything influences how we react to the situations of life. And even children raised on the same home, by the same roof, by the same parents, they grow up to be very different sometimes. We see the world differently. We react to life's situations differently. We assign different values to the same things. But we see, what we experience, these differences manifest themselves in every context in the life. At home, at work, among friends, even here in the church. Especially in regard to the practical aspects of religion. Generally speaking, our community of faith finds itself divided into two groups most of the time. On one side are those who are a little bit more tolerant concerning the things of God and the Christian life. They are not guided by taboos. They are not supplementing with others or with themselves. They are more tolerant regarding music, regarding worship in general. They don't impose themselves such rigid standards concerning Sabbath observance, diet, or entertainment. On the other side are those who are far more traditional. They are not keen on innovations. They prefer somewhat more conservative standards. As far as music goes, or literature are concerned, they impose much stricter rules upon themselves. Regarding dress, food, Sabbath keeping, what to do or what not to do. And the question is, what is wrong with them? And the answer is nothing, because we are all different from one another. But the problem starts, what comes when such differences begin to cause division in the church, when they begin to separate us from one another and place us in opposition to one another. That's where the trouble begins. Not rarely, these two groups, the more tolerant and the more traditional, they live with great difficulty, side by side. The more traditional group do not tie or point the finger towards the other group and start to criticize it. The more tolerant say that they are not true Christians, that they are becoming secularized, conforming to world practices, lowering their own standards, dishonoring God and the divine cause. Meanwhile, the more tolerant tend to despise the more traditional, thinking that they are outdated, hypocritical, legalistic, people who don't understand the true spirit of faith, of religion, people who deep down still believe that they can earn God's favor with that more rigid, box-shaped religion through what they do and what they do not do. This is not a problem exclusive to our times. It has always existed. And after all, we're all different. But this particular issue already existed in the early days of the church. We have a record of it. It existed during the times of Apostle Paul. And it was already causing problems in the Church of Rome, dividing the church. And when we go to Romans, the book of Romans, chapter 14, starting on verse 1, we read the following. Receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eat only vegetables. Verse 4. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day above another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. What is the context here? The background of what is happening. And Paul speaks about it in verse 15 of the same chapter. Yet, if your brother is grieved because of your food, you are no longer walking in love. Do not destroy with your food the one for whom Christ died. The problem was that the church in Rome was made of two groups. The groups of Jews and the groups of non-Jews, or you call it the Gentiles. That was the problem. And these two groups, Jews and Gentiles, were having serious difficulty to live together. The Jews accused the Gentiles of being lax about food, the observance of days. On the other side, the Gentiles accused the Jews to be promoting strange, legalistic, rigid practices in the church. To one group, those who do not eat meat and make distinctions regarding the observations of day, Paul refers to them as weak. Receive one who is weak in the faith. Paul calls them weak. To the other group, who ate everything and regarded all days alike, Paul calls them strong. But what exactly was the issue? The issue was similar to what was happening in the church of Corinth. In chapters 8 to 10 of 1 Corinthians, Paul is far more explicit in dealing with the problem. There he also mentioned that the strong and the weak, and the questions regarding food. And the whole subject related to the eating of meat, sacrifice to idols, a common practice among pagans in the Roman Empire. Animals were often brought to pagan temples, sacrificed to pagan gods. Afterwards, the meat of these animals would be eaten in the temple or sold to the market, the common market. This was one of the main problems that the church faced when it left the boundaries of the Judea, Samaria, the Judaism, and entered the Greek-Roman world. There was no idolatry in Israel. The problem there did not exist, but it existed outside in the Greek-Roman world. And there, more traditional Christians of Jewish origin believed that whoever ate meat that had been sacrificed to idols was participating in idolatry. They even avoided buying meat in the market, saying, who knows whether this meat wasn't or was devoted or sacrificed to idols. Others, including Paul himself, knew that an idol was just nothing, could be just a piece of wood or a piece of stone. They could not contaminate the meat, did not see any problem in eating the food. It is important that we understand the issue that this issue had nothing to do with Leviticus 11, the distinction between clean and unclean meat, clean and unclean animals. That is not what Paul is talking about. That distinction remains valid. It predates the covenant with God's people at Sinai. It goes back even before the flood. Before it is inherent with God's creation, universal. Leviticus 11 was not related to any of the temple ceremonies. Thus, it's not ceremonial in nature. It was not abolished when Jesus died on the cross. And what about the observance of the Ten Commandments? Or better, what about the observance of the days mentioned by the apostle? That had to do with the various ceremonial festivals, days of the Jewish religious calendar. In Leviticus 23, it has nothing to do with the 7-day Sabbath, which appears in the Ten Commandments. The Jews have several day holidays in their religious calendar. Leviticus 23 celebrated once a year. These were ceremonial because they were celebrated in the temple and pointed to some future work of Christ. Therefore, when Jesus died, these days lost their validity. Yet the Jews, accustomed to keeping these days, the so-called ceremonial Sabbaths, believed that they should continue. And they criticized the Gentiles for not keeping them. The Gentiles, in turn, believed that this had nothing to do with, this only had to do with the Old Covenant. We want the people of Israel with the Jewish religion. It was no longer required of Christians after Jesus' death to observe these ceremonies these days. The point is that the church in Rome was divided into two groups. On one side, Jews, whom Paul called weak in the faith, and the other, the Gentiles, the strong, saying that idols are nothing. The ceremonial days of the Jewish calendar no longer need to be observed by Christians. We should understand that this problem in the Church of Rome had nothing to do with biblical principles, but with personal differences regarding this and that, cultural differences in the practice of Christian life. And the moral tradition were attributing religious value to things that were secondary, things that were not essential to the faith. And that's why Paul called them weak. They went so far to think that only they then were right. And so they criticized anyone who thought differently. They did not accept differences. Anything that departed from their religious standard was rejected. And this was the greatest problem. The situation in the Church of Rome is typical of what has always happened in our churches in all times and in all places. No matter in Brazil, South America, Europe, United States, Africa, these problems have happened everywhere all the time. On one side, the traditionalists, radical, believing that certain practices or the lack of those practices represent a lowering of standards, the secularization of the church, and precisely a time when we should make very clear who we are and what is our job as a church. Precisely when we should make very clear. And this confused postmodern, post-Christian times, post-Christian world. For them, everything seems to be a matter of salvation. This group sees everything in black and white and classifies what happens in the church in two categories, right or wrong. And of course, the right thing is whatever they think is right. On the other side are the more tolerant, thinking that not everything is so sinful or that not everything is improper for Christians. They do not see only black and white. They know that not everything is simply right or wrong. There is a gray area between black and white, where many things fit. They are not necessarily right or wrong, but they reflect what? Our differences. Perhaps there's a third group in our churches. Paul does not speak of this group, but it is a group of those who want nothing with anything, who are nothing more than nominal Christians. They come to the church, and they are just here to be in the church. They relativize everything, thinking that religion is something completely personal. They do not take God the absolutes of God, seriously. They take themselves as the standard, believing that we can do or not do whatever we want. Let us call them liberals. This is not the group that Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 14. Actually, it's not neither the two groups that Paul is talking about in chapter 14. This group, the liberals, they probably have never been converted. They live in open apostasy. If the weak are not extreme, they are in one extreme, the strong are on the other extreme. Or whereas the strong, those with whom Paul identifies, are in a more balanced position. The strong and the weak are those who take religion seriously, who are seeking to do God's will. Only the strong are not as rigid as the weak, but they are generally Christians striving to maintain a healthy Christian life, to do what God wants them to do, according to their own vision of things. In Paul's words, they are more balanced, more moderate. In Romans chapter 15, in verse 1, we read that we then, who are strong, ought to bear with the struggles of the weak, and not to please ourselves. So Paul places himself among the strong. The strong are not the liberals who want nothing with anything. They are not unconverted. The strong, just like the weak, are attempting to take their Christian life seriously. But the problem is that when I am on the one side, on one extreme, and then I look over there, what do I see? Only liberals. And if I'm on the other side, and I look across, what I see? Only traditionals, radicals. And what are the points of conflict between the strong and the weak? The same as always. As in Rome, they involve diet, being vegetarian, how to keep the Sabbath. The weak are more rigid. The weak may even admit you walking along the beach on a Sabbath day in the afternoon with water up to your ankles, perhaps even up to your knees. It is okay. But if you sit on the water, or if you start swimming, then you are sinful. You are violating the Sabbath. The most common issues are those of dress, entertainment, the eternal problem of music, that so often splits church and divides church community. To the weak, nothing's allowed. Everything is a sign of secularization, wordlessness, apostasy. On the other side, the strong think that the weak are a bunch of backward, fundamentalist modern Pharisees, advocates of religion of all forms and appearances. In Paul's description could not be more accurate. If the strong tend to despise the weak generally tend to accuse the strong. And they do it with such vehemence that they end up fighting the very one who is the accuser per excellence, Satan. They begin to devour their fellow believers without pity, without mercy, all in the name of the true religion, the one only acceptable music, the only acceptable lifestyle. They use the Bible to defend what is nothing more than their own preferences, their tastes, what they have chosen as their standard before God, in regards to behavior, in regards to worship. And the problem is not liking this type of music, or preferring this type of other type of music, but it's this kind of lifestyle. The problem is that thinking that only these choices are correct. They define their faith by these secondary things, and thus develop a religion based on appearance, forms, formats. And how many young people have left the faith because of the intolerance of some who believe themselves to be owners of the truth, guardians of the true religion. Yet, in the name of a more mature, more stereotypal religion, in the name of faith, of Christian freedom, the strong often becomes indifferent to the sensitivities of the weaker if they are the ones in charge. The strong tend to show arrogance in attempting to impose their will, their standards, upon others, also without mercy, without pity. Both groups intend to do God's will, but when differences arise, the last thing seen in the true spirit of Christ, of respect, of tolerance, is not to be found. To speak with your brother alone, as Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18, in a spirit of kindness and love, that is what is rarely seen. To pray for one another, a sign of weakness. Self-criticism, that is for others. I'm convinced that I'm right. My position is the biblical one. My position is supported by the spirit of prophecy. It is not our differences that divide us, but our inability to recognize them and to lessen them. What should we do to reduce these tensions, especially in a time when we should be united? And this is where Paul's counsel goes to the church of Rome. Verse 3, chapter 14. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats. For God has received him. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. No one has the right to criticize. You don't have the right to criticize them. Them don't have the right to criticize you. Or to despise, much less condemn one another. Because no one here is the Lord of another. We are all servants of the Most High God. And the prerogative of judging belongs to God and God alone. It is not on the basis of our judgment that someone will be right or be wrong, accepted or rejected by God. In verse 4, Paul states that even if someone lives honestly according to the principles that he sees them, God knows them, and God is able to make him stand. In verse in chapter 14, Paul says, "But why do you judge your brother? Why do you show contempt for your brother? For we all shall stand before the judgment seat of Christ." In verse 12, "So then each of us shall give account of himself to God." None of us have been invested with prerogative to judge anyone whatsoever. Only God is able to judge. And each of us will give account of ourselves to God. Verse 13. "Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or cause to fall in our brother's way. I know and I am convinced by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself. But to him who considers anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Yet, if your brother is grieved because of your food, you are no longer walking in love. Do not destroy with your food the one for whom Christ died. Therefore, do not let your God good be spoken of as evil. No one lives in isolation. Our tastes, our choices may be good for us, but they may not be good for others. And our freedom ends where the individuality of our neighbor begins. No matter which side I am, my liberty ends when my brother's sensitive begins. There may be nothing wrong with my music. There may be nothing wrong with my choices of how I spend my free time, my lifestyle. But if someone is scandalized, if someone is saddened, then I'm causing an offense for whom Christ died. Imagine if everyone practices this. If the weak were a little bit more tolerant and said, I won't criticize, because I may simply begin or maybe try to impose my taste, my will. Imagine if the strong, on the other hand, said, I will not try to impose my own standards, my flaunt, my liberty, because I may be wounded someone of whom Christ died for. I may be hurting his conscience. Someone who, just like me, was bought by the blood of Christ. But instead, the weak likes to criticize because they think they are right. And the strong insist on doing because they think they are right. And thus the problem only grows. If we all took one step toward or the other, perhaps we might reach a point of harmony that is so desirable. Harmony is not living or thinking in the same way, but recognizing the differences. It is respect, mutual acceptance. In Romans chapter 15, verse 1, Paul says, we then who are strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading them to edification. In verse 7, therefore receive one another, just as Christ also received us, to the glory of God. In the Christian life, we must not ever think of us of only ourselves. In everything, in exercising Christian liberty, we must always pause and ask, how might this affect my brother? In a certain sense, each one of us is responsible for each other. Respect, consideration. Let us do this. Let us respect. Let us consider each one of us. Our brother needs, our friends needs. Let us consider the limits, the sensitivity of others that are not for favors to be granted to others, but a Christian duty. After all, we are all different, and it was God who made us this way.